I've just walked from the historic centre of Narbonne along the Canal du Robin, one of those beautiful French waterways that eventually links up with the Canal du Midi. And here we are, 15 minutes from the centre, at the new museum, which you can see behind us. You can see the broad form of the museum, a long horizontal building, 7 meters clear height inside, that gives a generosity to the galleries, and you can see the structure, the load-bearing walls, the beams that support the roof, and the secondary beams running east-west at right angles. The building is set on a plinth, and that's for very positive reasons, to keep the building out of the floodplain. And all around the building there is a moat which has several functions. It's either a part of the landscape, part of the car parking for the museum, or very importantly, a parade ground for Roman reenactments. We've moved up now onto one of the terraces on the south facade of the museum, away from the canal behind us, towards the entrance. And these are landscape terraces where people can sit and enjoy events that are happening on the big broad space between us and the canal. And you can see here very well the overall form, the constituent elements of the building. The solid, massive concrete walls in horizontal layers, dry tamped concrete, coloured to match the colours of the locality, the umbers, the earthy colours which you see throughout this district and throughout this area of France. And then above that, the primary beams, the secondary beams leading to the roof itself. The building, I think, explains itself very clearly when you see it from the outside, and that philosophy continues inside, as we'll see in just a minute. Arriving by car, you leave the autoroute and enter Narbonne off a short spur road. The site really is a gateway into Narbonne, and it's part of a bigger district of cultural and leisure and sporting facilities. There's a new theatre, a new stadium, and outdoor recreational spaces, which make the gateway to Narbonne focused on culture. So we've risen up the gentle ramp towards the main entrance, which is behind me. It is shaded from the sun, protected from the weather, and provides a grand entranceway to the new museum. And so now we've actually arrived at the entrance, the big swing door marking the point at which you turn to your left and enter the courtyard at the beginning of your experience of the museum. So now we're in the entrance courtyard, which of course in several ways reflects the courtyard of a Roman house. It has an open top light to let the air, the water in, a reflecting pool surrounded by the walls of the museum. And the focus of this space is a carved map of the Roman Empire, showing obviously Rome at the heart of the empire, and then Narbo Martius as actually the largest conurbation outside of Italy at that time. So it was Narbonne was a very significant part of the empire and reflected the importance of Gaul in that empire. So we've come into the museum proper. We're now in the main entrance, where there is a generous reception desk to buy tickets to the temporary exhibitions and the museum itself. And then behind me, you can see the cafe, the restaurant, which will be open to everybody who comes here and anybody in the surrounding district. And beyond that, a terrace where you can sit out and eat in the wonderful climate here in Narbonne. Next door to the cafe is the shop, where you can buy local produce, where you can buy guidebooks and so on. And then behind me there to the right, you can see your first glimpse of the Lapidary Wall. So we've arrived at the center point of the museum. This is the Lapidary Hall, and this houses over 800 funerary stones that have been preserved over the years. They started, of course, as memorial stones for those who died and were located, like the Via Appia Antica, on the outskirts of the city, on the main routes out of the city. They stayed there for many centuries until they started to build the medieval city walls of Narbonne. And in those days, people plundered Roman sites to create material for new construction. So they were reused as stones for the city walls. And there they remained until the 19th century. And in the 19th century, the railway came, the city of Narbonne grew, and the railway lines and the station was the cause of pulling the medieval walls down. They were taken down to make way for the railway and expansion. Luckily, there was a hero, and he rode to the rescue. He saved the stones and put them in a Romanesque church in the center of the town in the middle of the 19th century, where they remained until 2 years ago. That was an extraordinary act of preservation. So what we see here are those stones moved out of the church, restored and displayed on an industrial racking system. And the reason for this is the stones are actually working pieces of archaeology. The research laboratories for the museum, for the region, lie behind this lapidary wall, and the stones are used for research and for more detailed restoration. So this is a really working wall. Behind the first layer, which you can see directly, there is a gantry that moves up and down, and that can collect and pick any stone that is required and take it down and allow it to be slid through to the research side and studied and worked upon. So the whole of this wall is not a static display, it is very much a dynamic working wall, and the public are invited to enjoy the process of archaeology as well as an extraordinary display of Roman stonework. There are then 2 points of reference along the stone wall with audiovisual displays helping you to understand the context of these stones. Not all are funerary, some are just architectural pieces that were added to the collection. We're now looking at one stone in particular on the screen here, which forms part of the hall, and one can study a stone in 3 dimensions, looking at its every detail, and I'm sure I can enlarge it to see more of that detail. A beautiful rose motif. Here we are at the far end of the hall, and I think this makes an interesting point. It is the axis that links the arrival, the gateway, on one side, which we hope that the city will reorganize in time to be a more typical south of France Mediterranean square with trees and cars parked beneath, and maybe a market. And that then links directly through visually to the canal. So there's a very nice dialogue from this hall to the entry, the gateway, and the canal on the other side. We've now arrived at the entrance to the permanent collection, which is moved from the center of the town to the new building. The new building is essentially a single-story building. As far as the public is concerned, it's all on one level, accessible and easy to navigate. Its height, though, is generated by the need on the private side, the museum side of the building, to introduce a mezzanine level. We've arrived now in the first of the spaces in the permanent collection, and I think this space clearly shows the structural intent of the building. You have the load-bearing walls, And those walls support the primary beams. And then running east-west, you can see the secondary beams and the lighting and the acoustic panels that sit recessed between those secondary beams. We've developed an underfloor heating and cooling system for the building, which is very good in environmental terms. It's energy efficient to meet exacting environmental standards. But what I think is quite interesting is it reflects technology that the Romans developed 2,000 years ago. So it has a resonance with the purpose, the identity of the museum. So picking up on that theme again of reuse, you can see here a beautiful fragment from one of the temples, a very sophisticated piece of Roman carving, very delicate. And that must have made a considerable impact and contribution to people's experience of that building. But what is so fascinating is this stone was taken, and if we turn round to the reverse side, it was transformed as a piece of stone into a Romanesque carving. So many years later, the same piece of stone, but carved on the reverse side with the emblems of the city, becomes a new reused, re-employed work. I'm standing underneath one of the column heads of the capital of ancient Roman Narbonne, and it gives you some idea of the scale of the focal point of the city, the capital, a colonnade surrounding a central temple. It was a very important place. It was the largest conurbation outside of Italy and was a key port in the movement of people and goods around the Mediterranean. And in the display of the exhibition, you can see audiovisual reconstructions of that capital and other key parts of the city, very beautifully done. And I think that Adrian Gardin and his team have done a magnificent job in terms of the exhibiting of all the pieces here in Narbonne and how they come together and tell a story. So we're now in the temporary exhibition gallery. This will have a changing agenda of exhibitions over the years. And the first exhibition I find fascinating. It's about Roman architecture and its relevance today. And of course we can learn so much and have learned so much from Roman architecture, not only in terms of its intellectual, its philosophical approach, in terms of its construction, but also in terms of its engineering and the way the buildings were heated and serviced. One of the particular themes of the exhibition is reuse. And of course, stones, Roman stones, have been reused throughout history. And the Lapidary Wall is a perfect example of that. Stones that started off by being funerary stones for residents of Narbonne are turned into the construction of a medieval wall, which in turn occupied as an exhibit the Romanesque church, and now have been reused as a dramatic feature that is at the center of the design of this building.